Sorry, Neil.
Okay, yeah.
I need to apologize for that. We're experiencing a lot of technical problems in Spain nowadays. I do believe because a lot of people have moved into working remote and at home, etc., and the net is not prepared because we change everything, which is the company, we upgrade that, and I'm still crashing from time to time. So I do apologize for that.
No problem. Yeah, just demand. You know, that's everyone is trying to connect.
As technology, at the end of the day, you cannot control it. It's not in our hands. Although it really frustrates me when these things happen.
Yeah.
So you explain, or you briefly introduce what you've done through the last years since you started studying, etc., etc. I really like the way when you said that you actually volunteer to do some work at the uni and coaching, because nowadays, when a lot of coaches that comes to our courses, the ITU courses, ask me, how did you get to the ITU? And I was like, okay, 11 years ago, I started volunteering in a congress, and I did this and I did that. It was all voluntary job, etc., etc. So then 10 years later, then it paid off a little bit. So it's not like what you get now is what you did like 10 years ago. And also, you're still coaching some of the, you're coaching triathletes and also cyclists, right?
Yes.
And some of them female athletes. On the past was Flora, now you're coaching Taylor, right?
Yes, Taylor and yep.
And in cycling, you have, because I'm really bad with the names, you have Kasia?
Kasia Nieuwiedoma. She's actually in Girona right now, but she's on the Canyon SRAM team, and Taylor Wiles of the US as well. Sorry,
my daughter's trying to get into the room.
No problem. Mine's school right now upstairs online.
I need to log. Yeah. So I wanted to further discuss a little bit with you. What is the most challenging part for you when it comes to coaching females athletes?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting aspects, like of just the individual and how somebody communicates. So we tend to see, there's potentially different communication styles between men and women a lot of times. And so being able to have a communication style that matches with them is really important. So I have two sisters, and I have two daughters now. I don't have a son and didn't have any brothers. And so a lot of times for me, just living, with more women in my life and more females, like just understand that, those communications are a little bit different in certain cases. And so just maintaining an open line of communication is really important, and being able to explain what you're asking athletes to do and why they're doing it, rather than just, a lot of times, guys, you can just say, go do this, and they just turn their brain off and they'll go do it. And especially a lot of the women that I've worked with are very intelligent as well. They're not just great athletes, but also, they think deeply about what they're doing and they want to understand it. And so being able to both educate in why they're doing what they're doing and what you're asking for is important. I mean, Taylor Nibb, she's finishing up at Cornell University, which is an Ivy League school. She's, a very, very good student, very intelligent, and many of the other endurance athletes we tend to find have a high degree of academic achievement as well as in that sporting context. So in many cases, there is a little bit more that they're looking for from that, being educated and understanding what they're doing, because then they can make a better commitment to it.
Yeah, I think that's key, and I found many female athletes who actually have the same profile. They need to understand the whys, why they're doing the stuff, and not just, as we will say in Spain, just swallow what the coach is giving, and I do it, and that's it. So that's not actually the profile. So it's to understand. So what kind of so go ahead.
And in doing that as a coach, being able to explain what you're doing or why you're asking them to do things helps you understand it better, like understand that foundationally. I've had athletes over time that I've worked with that it felt initially like they were challenging me, but they wanted to understand better. And so it wasn't until I realized, okay, they just really want to know, and they don't have all the same background that I've had. And so I need to then explain why, and then you get better, not just buy-in, but they're able to complete things and make the adjustments in a given session, because you can't, I don't know how the athlete is actually feeling, right? I may ask them and get some feedback. They may tell me certain things. I may be able to see something in their mechanics in a given session and notice maybe they're compensating in some way and we should pull back. But teaching the athlete to understand themselves and why they're doing what they're doing allows them to have greater success over time.
Definitely. And it also kind of lowers us to, I'm not going to say the level because we have different level, but when it comes to explaining, because we used to use a different kind of terminology. So we talk about VO2 max, thresholds, etc., and we do understand what that means because we study at the uni, physiology, etc., etc. But when you actually try to explain something regarding, let's say, running economy to an athlete, you definitely need to pick the right words or the right examples for them to understand.
Yes.
And this is actually key, So I kind of engage and encourage athletes to challenge their coaches and always ask the whys behind. And some coaches out there obviously don't like that. But anyway, I'm not here to make friends. It's just to educate.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, my goal as a coach is to help the athlete to be more capable and understand more what they're doing, so that in some case in the future, I may not be as necessary of a piece for them to have success, that they can go. Because, in my coaching over time, I'm not one of those coaches who is at every event every time. Certain key events, yes, but having athletes that understand what they're doing and are able to, on their own, make good decisions, execute, and adapt in the situation, I think is far more important than having somebody coaching is maybe less ideal. Having athletes that are capable of autonomy is I think an important thing.
Yeah, actually it is, because per my philosophy of coaching, we developed for the ITU a program for selecting athletes, and I don't really like the word talent, but I always emphasize the fact that if you as a coach needs to grab the hand of your athletes and always pull them to training practices, to competition, to oversee them, what they're doing, whether they're doing the workout or not, it's just not gonna happen.
It can be very short-lived without that intrinsic motivation. Yeah,
definitely. So what when you're working with these female athletes, do you consider, or do you take into consideration the menstrual cycles when it comes to prescribing the training plans?
I'd say a little bit less in prescribing training, but adapting over time. So I ask them, in their training logs, online training logs, just to note when they start their cycle and when they end. And it takes a little bit of time just to see how that affects what they're doing in training. And honestly, there's a big variety in responses from athlete to athlete, and even within an athlete over time, how that impacts them. And the other aspect that we have in competition is the race happens on a given date. And regardless of where you are in your cycle, the race is happening on that day. So having athletes understand how they feel and what goes on different days, and not necessarily avoiding exclusively like certain times in that cycle, to have intensity or harder sessions, because again, the race is going to happen when it's going to happen, and that cycle may or may not, if they're lucky, it is in a period, in a phase of their cycle where it's not an impact. But in other cases, it might be the Olympics and they're right in the middle of that, and can't say let's wait next week. That's not how it works.
I don't perform very well when I have my period. Can you just please postpone it a week? No, definitely. But it really surprised me when I was having some chats with even athletes that been racing elite level, and they haven't, and they never considered that, for any purposes. And I was kind of, okay, it's really, really extensive, and it might be affected by many, many factors, but I think you should consider it a little bit because it matters. So.
Exactly. And so that's part of, in noting in the training log how they're feeling, what's going on situationally, what they're able to do, compared to a week before, a week after, and then, having that information based on that personal individual response.
Definitely. You said you're looking, or you gathering this information through the logs. I assume you use any software available. I don't know if you are on Training Peaks or any other. Your own one, I think, right? You have your own one?
So we have for workouts within the Sufferfest, we have specific training schedules there, workouts. For just kind of that back and forth information, I do use Training Peaks. With some athletes, I've used today's plan as well. So, a couple different formats, but just having them note there. And I also like with a training log, I don't need a 10-page diary of like what's going on every, second of that day and how that impacted the workout in every way, but like the highlights. What they did with respect to that workout and generally kind of how that felt, if there were any physical sensations or things that we need to note to look back, because searching through by keyword is kind of nice. You see repetitive patterns emerge with certain types of training or efforts and making adaptations based on that.
Definitely, especially if you have also coaches, athletes in different parts of the world,
all
with different
over.
Time zones, etc., etc. I was having one of the live chat with Bobby McGee, who's actually around. I said, well, I've never been in Boulder before, but this week I'm remotely going twice. So we're saying whether the novice coaches are more focused on coaching the numbers rather than coaching individuals, and we both agree that's kind of problem we're seeing all over the world. That they're forgetting about the individuals because we are managing so much data, but data is not everything.
Exactly. So data is not information. Data is, just straight up numbers in some way. It's not till it makes sense that it can become information. If you think of the word information, you have to be informed. It has to have some relevance to something else. So if somebody sends me a power file, from a given workout, okay, that's data until I have, relative comparative data and information to compare to, and the context. So the comments of what they did and how they felt, then it starts to make more sense. I can make more use of that. That data can be transformed into information, and then gathering that over time and being able to provide feedback. So that feedback loop, kind of synthesizing and then communicating back and being able to adapt and adjust based on pattern recognition, I think is a part of the way I utilize data. So even the concept of sports science. Well, some people like with science, that's the answer. The answer is science. I'm like, no, science is a method. It's a method. It's not an answer. It's a method of how you do things. And so with the data, again, it needs to be information. You have to transform, translate, and make sense of it. And then you can be using that. And you can be a data-driven decision, but it's still something that you have to process the other pieces that come with that for it to be truly informative and useful.
Definitely. And I had
what's going on right here for the athlete.
There is no software, or the software is not well. The settings are not okay. Nothing is gonna happen. But I had one of these coffee talks with Gregoire Milliet, and I really like a quote he has, that the scientific training doesn't exist actually, because so the sports science give us the fact or the base, but then we cannot replicate a lab environment out there. So it's a combination of everything. So since we were naming the power meters and all the data and etc., this device has become, I would say, almost mandatory, or it's very, very common among professional athletes and also age grouper.
Yeah.
When I came across to your website, the Sufferfest, I really like the concept of the 4D test. And actually, it was something that I was doing in the past, but obviously I didn't have any commercial there was not market, and to me made sense the fact of testing the 4 different metabolic energy. So could you explain a little bit what is that and why it's important to have that done?
Definitely. So the 40P power is 4-dimensional power. And so what we look at is basically kind of 4 different types of effort. So you have kind of peak power or neuromuscular power. That really, we look at that instantaneous, like 5-second power. A lot of that might be related to like vertical jump and the amount of distribution of fast twitch muscle fibers and the neuromuscular connections that you've developed there. So peak power, 5-second power is neuromuscular power on the top. Next, we have anaerobic capacity. That's something we look at in our testing process, like a 1-minute maximal effort at the end of a series of other efforts. Anaerobic capacity is being able to basically break down carbohydrate without oxygen. You can get energy pretty quickly, but it's not terribly sustainable. There's a secondary element to anaerobic capacity of this on-off effort nature. So if you think of an ITU cycling circuit that has a lot of corners, each of those accelerations are not kind of a pure sprint, and it's also not a steady state. And so it's somewhere in between, which is more in this anaerobic capacity realm. So that's the second level. And then we look at max aerobic power, which is kind of like, we use a 5-minute effort for that to assess that point. And that's pretty close to power at VO2 max, which again, there's a genetic component to that, but still training can impact that. And then finally, we look at the lowest end, FTP or threshold power, what is sustainable. So if somebody was to do a 40K time trial and not have to run fast after it, that 40K approximate average power for about an hour is pretty close to what we would see in that FTP. When we do our test, we actually do the 5-minute effort first. Well, we actually do the 5-second sprints first, just kind of prime the system. You can recover from those in a few minutes. Then we do the 5-minute maximal effort with a limited recovery, then going into the 20-minute effort. So if you do a maximal 5-minute effort prior to the 20-minute, then you get a pretty close equilibration of what that 20-minute effort does represent a more sustainable 30 to 60-minute type of effort. And then we end with that 1 minute just to see on that reproducibility of high-end power. And so those 4 values then we use to target different types of training. So we see a very large spread in the capacity for individuals to produce neuromuscular power. So we might have, we could have 2 athletes that have the same FTP, and let's just use a simple round number. Yeah. Let's just say 300 watts. And we might have one athlete whose absolute peak 1-second power is, let's just say 900 watts, which isn't bad. That's 300% of their FTP. Another athlete though, may be in excess of 500% of that. They could do, 5 times 3, 1500 watts for 5 seconds. And so if we had them both do sprints at a certain percentage of FTP, it's irrelevant. If we had them both do a series of sprints at 250%, well, the one athlete with the 900 watt peak power is pushing 750 watts and is going to be fatigued, after a few of those efforts. The athlete who is doing now, the same 750 watts is only working at half of his maximum capacity. And so it's a 50% of his neuromuscular power effort. He could do that all day and not get fatigued and just keep going. And so we looked at, okay, it's important to scale the different types of efforts based on those systems. So the neuromuscular power for short sprint work, anaerobic capacity for, say 20 to 60 second efforts with limited recovery, and then kind of VO2 or max aerobic power efforts like 2-minute, 3-minute intervals or series of kind of the micro intervals, 40-20s or 30-30s and those kind of ways, targeting that max aerobic power rather than FTP yields a more similar stress for athletes with different individual capacities in those ranges.
Really, really interesting. And as I said, I kind of use a similar approach. And once again, coming to what we say about coaching the data, I've been asked during the courses, how important is the FTP for triathletes? And actually say, well, it's quite for ITU, standard sprint distance, say, well, it's quite important because you have to have it high. But, you know, when you actually look at the data, this intensity is the least the athletes are spending at. So
in the race, in like the race, few percent.
There is nothing, 10, I've seen some files, it's like 10, 15%. So it's pretty much it's ridiculous. Obviously, it allows you, having a high threshold allows you to do something else, but I still see, you know, coaches prescribing things like, I don't know, 10 times, 5 minutes, FTP efforts, and I'm always telling them that this is actually not specific to what the guys are going to face in there. So the question is, what they're going to face on a race day? Say what? Anything. And therefore, all the
be prepared across the entire range. Exactly.
So it's really important to have a power profile of each athlete and develop it as it best, because actually they're gonna need everything. Joe Schumann was telling me once, Henry Schumann's father, that they count Yokohama had around 200 plus tons. So that was 200 plus accelerations. So it's not like, okay, then this is a message I always deliver. So you cannot go back now to your training environment and ask the guys to do, I don't know, 300 sprints. Because Vicente has said in one course that Yokohama has. No, it's something you develop through the years and if you need. Because at the end of the day, you just need to develop the weaknesses. The strengths are already there. So just let's focus on that. That's why the concept, I'll share the website in after the chat, because I think it's quite important. You have a really, really good stuff in there. And I think it's a really innovative approach for, and really, really specific. So congratulations, because I do believe there is a lot of job behind.
Thanks. Yeah.